Imagine a continent rising from decades of underdevelopment, suddenly crisscrossed by gleaming railways, massive dams lighting up millions of homes, and brand new cities emerging from the sand, all stamped with one unmistakable signature: Made in China. In just 20 years, China has poured more money into African infrastructure than the entire Western world combined, announcing $51 billion in new deals in 2024 alone. Kenya's ultramodern trains now outpace colonial-era tracks. A bridge in Mozambique longer than Manhattan's skyline has ended centuries of isolation. Egypt is literally building a second capital with Chinese cranes dominating the horizon. But behind the concrete and steel lies the question everyone is afraid to ask out loud. Is this the greatest development gift Africa has ever received, or the most sophisticated economic takeover in modern history? Debt traps, displaced villages, vanishing resources, and Beijing's growing political leverage cast long shadows over the shining projects. Here are the top 10 Chinese megaprojects rewriting Africa's future, ranked by scale, ambition, and controversy. One of them is already called Africa's Three Gorges. Another could bankrupt an entire nation. Buckle up. The new scramble for Africa has already begun, and it's being built $1 billion contract at a time. Story. It's 4:30 a.m. in Nairobi's Syokimau station, and the Madaraka Express is already humming. Sleek electric locomotives painted in Kenya's flag colors glide in from Mombasa exactly on schedule. Something unthinkable on the rickety British-built meter-gauge line they replaced. Passengers stream out clutching briefcases and sacks of maize, and dreams of better jobs in the capital. A journey that once took 12 bone-rattling hours now takes 4.5. This is China's calling card in Africa: speed, scale, and steel. The Nairobi-Mombasa Standard Gauge Railway, SGR, completed in 2017 for $3.2 billion, 90% financed by China's Exim Bank, tops every list for good reason. It carries over 7 million passengers a year, slashed freight costs by 40%, and triggered a corridor of factories and housing estates along its 472 kilometers route. Kenyan presidents love riding it for photo ops. Ordinary citizens call it the Chinese miracle. Yet in quiet corners of parliament, lawmakers whisper about the $3.8 billion debt still owed and the Chinese managers who still run day-to-day operations 8 years after handover. Kenya's public debt-to-GDP ratio crossed 70% largely because of this single railway. When critics call it a debt trap express, Beijing smiles and points to the packed trains. Just 2,000 kilometers south, another Chinese marvel tells a different story. The Maputo-Katembe Bridge in Mozambique, Africa's longest suspension bridge at 3 kilometers, slices across Maputo Bay like a silver blade. Before 2018, residents of Katembe woke at 3 a.m. to queue for unreliable ferries. Today they cross in 10 minutes, and land prices in once isolated Katembe have quintupled. Fishermen now sell their catch directly in the capital. Teenagers attend better schools. Chinese construction camps have become permanent neighborhoods. The $785 million price tag was paid mostly by Chinese loans, but Mozambique's gas boom means repayment looks feasible. Here, at least, the narrative of win-win feels real. Head north and the picture gets murkier. Egypt's new administrative capital, rising 45 kilometers east of Cairo, is a $58 billion bet that China is eager to bankroll. Chinese firms are erecting the continent's tallest tower, 1 kilometer when finished, a central business district that dwarfs Dubai's, and an opera house that looks suspiciously like Beijing's National Center for the Performing Arts. President Sisi wants to move 6 million people out of choking Cairo by 2030. Critics call it a vanity project for the elite, built on 700 square kilometers of desert while downtown Cairo crumbles. Chinese contractors employ mostly Chinese workers, and payment is secured against future Suez Canal revenues. When completed, the city will be a monument to Egypt-China friendship, or to Egypt's growing dependence, depending on whom you ask. Energy tells an even starker tale. Angola's Kakilo Kabaka hydropower project on the Kwanza River, due online in 2027, will produce 2,172 megawatts, more than doubling the country's current capacity. Chinese banks financed it, Chinese engineers designed it, and 10,000 Chinese workers are building it. Angola pays with oil. The math works until oil prices crash. Then Luanda begs for debt restructuring, which Beijing happily grants, in exchange for more oil concessions and voting alignment at the UN. The dam will flood 170 square kilometers, displacing entire communities who have received paltry compensation. Local activists who protest too loudly disappear. Yet when the turbines finally spin, blackouts that plague Luanda for decades may become history. Progress and repression arrive in the same convoy. Nigeria's story is pure drama. The Mambilla hydropower project in Taraba State, 3,050 megawatts capacity, $5.8 billion price tag, has been about to start since 1982. In 2017, President Buhari signed with a Chinese consortium led by CGGC. Billions in mobilization fees reportedly vanished. Ministers were sacked. Courts froze accounts. Construction crawls while lawyers feast. When or if it is ever finished, Mambilla could supply 20 to 25% of Nigeria's electricity. Until then, it remains the continent's most expensive ghost dam. A cautionary tale of corruption meeting unlimited Chinese patience. Contrast that with the Addis-Djibouti Railway, the rare project that actually works as advertised. The 756 kilometers electrified line, opened in 2018, cut freight time from 3 days by truck to 12 hours by train. Ethiopia, landlocked since Eritrea's independence, suddenly had reliable access to the sea. Factory output in Addis jumped. Consumer prices for imported goods dropped 15 to 20%. Djibouti's port revenue soared. Over 80% of the $4 billion cost was a Chinese loan at 2% interest over 30 years, terms the World Bank rarely matches. Ethiopia's GDP growth averaged 9% in the years following completion. Even fierce critics of neocolonialism ride the train. Tanzania's Bagamoyo port dream is the opposite. A $10 billion megaproject announced with fanfare in 2013, then frozen in 2019 when President Magufuli and later President Samia balked at terms that would have given China merchants port a 99-year lease and immunity from Tanzanian law. Construction cranes still rust on site, a reminder that African leaders are learning to push back, sometimes too late, sometimes just in time. Ivory Coast's Suber Dam, 275 megawatts, $572 million, 2017, and Namibia's Walvis Bay Container Terminal expansion, doubled capacity to 750,000 TEU, 2019, are quieter successes. Lights stayed on, ships got bigger, bills got paid, and a few protests made international news. They prove that when governance is halfway decent and the resource curse of oil or diamonds is absent, Chinese finance can deliver exactly what it promises. So what is the final ledger? On the plus side, hundreds of thousands of megawatts added, thousands of kilometers of modern railways and roads, ports that finally match Asia's, cities rising where there was only sand. Africa's infrastructure deficit, estimated at $100 billion per year, is being filled faster by China alone than by all Western donors combined. On the minus side, debt distress in a dozen countries, opaque contracts, environmental devastation, tens of thousands displaced with inadequate compensation, and a growing pattern where African nations trade sovereignty for concrete. Chinese firms still control most operations. Local workers are often relegated to menial jobs. Raw materials flow east while finished goods flow back, sometimes undercutting infant African industries. The most honest answer is that both narratives are true at once. China is not a charity, nor is it a cartoon villain. It is a hard-nosed superpower pursuing 21st century mercantilism with African characteristics, offering what no one else will. Massive, fast, no strings, no human rights strings. That is, financing. Whether that ultimately liberates or ensnares Africa depends less on Beijing's intentions than on Africa's own governance, negotiating skill, and willingness to say no when the terms are predatory. For now, the cranes keep rising, the trains keep running, and a continent watches with equal parts awe and unease as its skyline, its power grid, and its future are literally being built by hands from the other side of the world. The new Silk Road has reached Africa, and it is paved with concrete, debt, and ambition. Where it leads next is the biggest story of the century.